The watchers in the darkness have been kind. As I speak these words, Void of Fears hovers just 900 subscribers away from our 10k goal. Each of you who clicks that subscribe button pulls another thread from the veil between worlds. Every like and comment feeds what waits in the shadows. Your support has carried this channel through the blackest nights. The entity that guides these stories acknowledges your presence. Now let's dive into the void where tonight's nightmare awaits you. The scream of the drill bit stopped abruptly, replaced by an eerie silence that settled over the facility. Like a shroud, I stared at the monitor, my hands trembling despite the heated interior of the control room. The readings made no sense. We breached something, a cavity where no cavity should exist, nearly 9 miles beneath Alaska's frozen surface. Elian, are you seeing this? Neve's voice cracked over the intercom. I could hear the fear beneath her scientific detachment. I'm seeing it, I replied, throat dry, but I don't believe it. That was 3 weeks ago, before the sky turned black, before we lost contact with the outside world, before the storm that defied all natural laws began consuming everything in its path, before the nightmares became reality. My name is Elian Kovic, senior geologist on NASA's classified deep drilling expedition, codenamed Prometheus. I'm recording this because I don't think I'll make it out alive. Someone needs to know what we found beneath the Brooks Range, what we woke up, something ancient, something that was deliberately buried before humans ever walked the earth, something that has waited billions of years for this moment. I've barricaded myself in what remains of our communications room. The backup generator won't last much longer. Outside, the wind howls with voices that sound almost human. The temperature has dropped to -60. The auroras that once painted the Alaskan sky with gentle greens and blues have been replaced by pulsating tendrils of sickly luminescence that reach down like hungry fingers. They're searching for us. For me. I need to tell this story from the beginning. I need someone to understand what happened here. I need someone to stop them from doing it again. God help us all. Looking back, there were signs from the beginning. Signs we ignored in our scientific arrogance, our hunger for discovery. The native Inupiat people refused to work at our site, despite the generous compensation packages. Their elders spoke of ancient legends about the Brooks Range, stories of the time when the sky turned sick, and those who wait below the ice. We dismissed it as superstition. Now I know they were trying to warn us. 6 months earlier, when NASA selected me for this mission, I was ecstatic. I'd spent my entire career studying extreme geological formations, specializing in deep Earth anomalies. Project Prometheus represented the pinnacle of deep Earth research, a revolutionary drilling platform built to reach depths previously thought impossible. The public story was resource exploration, rare minerals, geothermal potential. But those of us with the highest clearance knew the truth. We were hunting for life in Earth's deep biosphere, organisms that evolved in complete isolation from the surface world for billions of years. Preliminary radar and gravitational surveys had detected an anomaly, an unexpected density variation 9 miles beneath the surface. Something that didn't match the surrounding geological strata. Something that appeared to have structure. The scientific implications were staggering. If we found evidence of a deep biosphere, especially one that had evolved independently from surface life, it would rewrite textbooks overnight. It might even provide insights into how life might evolve on other worlds, beneath the ice of Europa, or in the subsurface oceans of Enceladus. The Brooks Range in northern Alaska was chosen for its geological stability and remoteness, perfect for keeping secrets. The permafrost provided a stable drilling platform, and the isolation meant minimal public scrutiny. Our facility was a marvel of engineering, a sprawling complex of prefabricated modules anchored to the permafrost, housing 32 scientists and support staff. At the center stood the drill itself, a 60-meter titanium monstrosity with a diamond carbide bit designed to withstand pressures that would crush conventional equipment. The entire operation cost over $2 billion, funded through classified black budget allocations under the guise of deep space research initiatives. I remember the day I first arrived, stepping off the transport helicopter into biting cold that instantly froze the moisture in my breath. Dr. Navae Imura, our project lead, greeted me with a handshake that was as precise and efficient as her reputation suggested. A brilliant physicist with a background in exotic matter, she had pioneered the drilling technology we would be using. "Dr. Kovic," she said, her voice clipped and professional. "Your reputation precedes you. Welcome to Prometheus." Behind her stretched our base, 7 interconnected hexagonal structures arranged around the central drilling platform, the whole complex glowing with warmth against the endless white of the Alaskan wilderness. It looked like a space colony transplanted to Earth's most inhospitable region. In many ways, that's exactly what it was. A testbed for technologies that might one day mine the moons of Jupiter or the asteroid belt. The first month passed in a blur of calibrations, test drills, and core sample analyses. We were making history with every meter we descended. By week 12, we passed 8 miles beneath the surface, shattering the previous depth record. The core samples were already revolutionizing our understanding of Earth's prehistoric composition. We discovered microorganisms that thrived in conditions that should have been lethal: extreme pressure, no light, minimal nutrients. Navae was talking Nobel Prize. The atmosphere at the facility was electric, with possibility. I got to know my colleagues during those early weeks. Felix Vasiliev, our Russian meteorologist, a bear of a man with a fondness for chess and vodka, who monitored the harsh Alaskan weather with the same meticulous attention he gave to his perfectly trimmed beard. Dessa Calavera, our lead biologist, brilliant and intense, who spoke to her microbial cultures as if they were pets and kept a collection of oddities from previous expeditions, fossilized extremophiles and ancient bacterial specimens preserved in acrylic blocks. Torin Blake, our chief engineer, whose hands could fix anything mechanical, but who struggled with basic human interaction, his Asperger's both a gift and a challenge in our isolated environment. And dozens of others, technicians, security personnel, support staff, all of us bound by confidentiality agreements, thick enough to stop bullets and the shared excitement of pushing beyond the boundaries of known science. None of us could have predicted what waited below. None of us were prepared. Then came day 87. We'd reached our target depth, the drill bit pushing through a layer of unusual density, a stratum that our preliminary surveys suggested might be a pocket of trapped gases or perhaps a liquid reservoir. The vibration sensors showed decreasing resistance, which typically indicates a transition to a less dense material. Standard procedure would have been to slow our advance, extract a core sample, analyze, then proceed with caution. Navae pushed us harder. "We're making history here," she reminded us during the morning briefing. "Every hour we hesitate is an hour someone else might catch up." That competitive drive, the need to be first, to make the breakthrough, to secure the funding and recognition, it's the lifeblood of modern science and our downfall. At 3:17 p.m. Alaska Standard Time, the drill sensors registered a sudden pressure drop. The resistance vanished entirely. We'd broken through into something. The alarms started blaring the moment our drill penetrated the void. Every emergency system activated simultaneously. Pressure warnings, seismic alerts, atmospheric anomalies. The entire facility shuddered as if struck by an earthquake, though my instruments registered nothing seismic, just a sudden, inexplicable drop in atmospheric pressure directly above our location. I was in the geology lab when it happened. analysing the previous day's core samples. The vibration sent equipment crashing to the floor. Microscopes, sample containers, computer monitors. An aluminum cabinet toppled, nearly crushing Torin as he dove out of the way. The lights flickered, emergency systems kicked in, and the facility's AI announced in its calm, synthetic voice, "Attention, anomalous event detected. All personnel proceed to designated safety zones." What the hell was that? Torin scrambled to his feet, blood trickling from a cut on his forehead. I was already moving to my monitoring station, pulling up the real-time drilling telemetry. What I saw made no sense. A perfect sphere of nothing, where solid rock should be. A cavity approximately 40 meters in diameter, with our drill bit suspended at its upper edge. The pressure readings were fluctuating wildly, and the temperature sensors were registering contradictory data, extreme cold and heat simultaneously, as if the basic laws of thermodynamics had suddenly become optional. "Shut it down," I shouted into my comm unit, already running toward the central control room. "Full stop on all drilling operations. Initiate retrieval protocol Alpha." But it was already too late. Felix burst into the control room moments after I arrived, his weather maps displaying patterns I'd never seen before. Swirling clouds were forming directly above us, condensing from seemingly nowhere, spinning counterclockwise at impossible speeds. The barometric pressure was dropping catastrophically, the kind of sudden change that precedes supercell tornadoes, or the eye of a Category 5 hurricane. "This isn't normal," he said, his Russian accent thickening with stress. "The barometric readings are off the charts. It's like the air itself is being pulled toward a single point." Through the observation window, I could see it happening. The clear Alaskan sky darkening, as if someone had spilled ink across the horizon. The clouds weren't just forming. They were organizing, creating a perfect spiral centered directly above our drilling platform. I'd studied atmospheric science as part of my geological training, enough to know that what I was seeing violated every principle of meteorology. Navai overrode my shutdown command from her private terminal. Of course she did. The woman had staked her entire career on this project, and we just made the discovery of a lifetime. A massive subterranean chamber that predated the formation of Earth's crust itself, the ultimate prize for a scientist of her ambition. She strode into the control room, flanked by her research assistants, her eyes gleaming with the fervour that had made her both brilliant and dangerous. Where the rest of us saw danger, she saw opportunity. Where we saw warning signs, she saw obstacles to overcome. "We're sending down probes," she announced, eyes gleaming with the fervour that had made her both brilliant and dangerous. "Dessa, prep for biological samples. Torin, recalibrate the drill for minimal vibration. Whatever's down there, we're going to document it." "Are you insane?" I gestured to the weather displays. "Look at what's happening. This isn't a normal geological reaction to a cavity breach. We need to seal it and evacuate until we understand what we're dealing with." She dismissed my concerns with a wave of her hand. "It's a temporary atmospheric disturbance caused by the pressure differential. Basic physics, Elian. Once the pressure equalizes, the weather will normalize." I still remember how the light caught her eyes as she spoke. That unnatural gleam of ambition. Had the influence already begun, even then? Had it reached up through 9 miles of rock and tainted our minds from the first moment of contact? Looking back, I realized we never had a chance. We were being manipulated from the instant the drill broke through. I should have fought harder, should have forced an evacuation when we still had time. But curiosity is the deadliest human trait. It's what brought us here, to this godforsaken corner of Alaska, drilling deeper than any team in history. That night, as the storm formed above us, I stood on the observation deck and watched the clouds spiral inward. They moved with purpose, with intent. The aurora had disappeared, replaced by darkness so complete it seemed to absorb light rather than merely block it. The facility vibrated with activity as Navai mobilized the team to investigate our discovery. Special probes were prepared, designed for extreme environments, equipped with high-definition cameras, sampling mechanisms, and sensors to measure everything from radiation to magnetic fields. The first one descended at 8:42 p.m., trailing a hardened fiber optic cable that allowed us to receive real-time data. We gathered in the main laboratory to watch the feed, the tension palpable as the probe descended into darkness. For the first mile, everything appeared normal. The smooth walls of our drill shaft, occasional geological features we documented during the initial drilling. Then the probe entered the cavity. The video feed showed nothing. Not darkness, not empty space. Nothing. A visual absence that hurt to look at directly, as if the camera was transmitting an image of the concept of emptiness itself. The sensor readings were equally baffling, fluctuating between null values and impossible extremes. Temperature oscillating between absolute zero and plasma level heat within microseconds. Radiation readings that exceeded known physics, then dropped to perfect zero. "What are we looking at?" Torin whispered, his face pale in the blue glow of the monitors. No one answered. No one could. Then, after 7 minutes of indecipherable footage, the camera captured something that chilled us to our cores. Movement. Not random currents or geological shifting. Deliberate, purposeful movement. Something within that impossible space was aware of our intrusion. The probe's lights caught a fleeting glimpse of structure, surfaces that seemed to shift between states of matter, geometric patterns that rearranged themselves even as we watched, and colours that shouldn't exist, hues beyond the visible spectrum, somehow translated by our brains into visual hallucinations that left after images burned into our retinas. The probe lasted 12 minutes before all transmission ceased. The backup systems failed simultaneously. The hardened cable, designed to withstand pressures found at the bottom of the Mariana Trench, was simply gone, severed 9 miles below the surface by something we couldn't begin to comprehend. Navae was undeterred. If anything, the loss of the probe only intensified her determination. "Prepare another probe," she ordered. "Add additional shielding and modify the sensor array to account for the anomalous readings." I tried again to make her see reason. We need to stop and analyze what just happened. That probe didn't fail. It was destroyed. Something down there reacted to our presence. Exactly. Her eyes were feverish with excitement. Do you understand what this means? Intelligent reaction to stimulus, at depths where nothing should be alive. This could be the greatest discovery in human history. The second probe was deployed 3 hours later. This time we modified the sampling arm to collect material from the edge of the cavity. If we couldn't safely explore the void itself, we could at least analyze its boundaries. The first samples came up glowing. Not radioactive, something else entirely. A pulsating blue-green luminescence that seemed to move with purpose within the ancient rock. I'll never forget the moment Dessa first placed a specimen under the electron microscope in our lab. Her gasp brought all of us running. "This is impossible," she breathed, stepping back from the eyepiece. "Look at this structure. It's not like anything in our taxonomic records." On the screen we watched structures that defied classification. Not quite organic, not quite mineral. Microbial colonies that had survived in complete isolation for billions of years. But they weren't static. As we watched, the structures shifted, rearranged themselves in response to the microscope's electron beam. "They're reacting to light," she whispered, her dark eyes wide with wonder. "These organisms, they're responding to stimuli. Elian, they're still alive." Torin, ever the skeptic, pushed forward to look. "That's not possible. Nothing could survive those pressures, that isolation for that long." But the evidence was right before us. Not only were they alive, they were unlike any life we had ever encountered. Their cellular structure, if you could call it that, seemed to exist in a state of constant flux, reshaping itself as we observed. It violated everything we understood about biology. "We need to sequence this immediately," Neve ordered, her voice tight with excitement. "And I want a chemical breakdown of that luminescence. Is it bioluminescence? Some kind of energy storage mechanism. Get me answers." I remember feeling uneasy even then. There was something deliberate about the way the organisms moved. Not random, not merely reactive. It was as if they were studying us, as much as we were studying them. As the team worked through the night, analysing the samples with every tool at our disposal, the storm above intensified. The wind howled around our facility, reaching speeds that should have torn the structures from their foundations. Yet the damage was minimal and strangely selective. Communication arrays destroyed, while nearby weather sensors remained untouched, specific power conduits severed, while others continued functioning normally. It wasn't random destruction, it was surgical, precise. That night, the nightmares began. I dreamed of drowning in an endless black ocean, something vast and ancient watching me from the depths. I could feel its hunger, its patient malevolence. It had been waiting so long, so very long. I woke gasping for air, my bedsheets soaked with sweat despite the sub-zero temperatures outside our facility. I wasn't the only one. Torin hadn't slept in days, his hands shaking as he calibrated equipment. Azura Opal, one of our junior geologists, complained of hearing whispers in empty rooms. Dessa began sketching obsessively, the same swirling patterns over and over, covering the walls of her quarters. Only Navaya seemed energized, working 20-hour days without fatigue, her eyes increasingly bright and fevered. The second night, my dreams became more vivid. I stood on the surface of a planet that wasn't Earth, a world of perpetual twilight under 3 pale suns. Vast structures of crystal and some black reflective material stretched towards a sky filled with unfamiliar stars, and all around me, moving through streets built for bodies unlike any I could comprehend, were entities that shifted and flowed like living mercury. They were singing. Their voices penetrated my mind, showing me visions of countless worlds consumed, countless civilizations transformed into something new, something greater. They showed me Earth as it would be, purified, perfected under their guidance. I woke screaming. My quarters were freezing, breath fogging in the air despite the environmental controls being set to 70 degrees. The digital clock by my bed displayed impossible symbols instead of numbers, cycling through configurations that hurt my eyes. The walls themselves seemed to pulse slightly, as if breathing. I fled to the common area, seeking the comfort of other humans, only to find Riker Tenley, our security chief, already there. He sat motionless, staring at a cup of coffee that had frozen solid despite the steam still rising from its surface. "You're seeing it too," he said without looking up. It wasn't a question. "What's happening to us?" I asked, my voice barely a whisper. He finally met my gaze, and I saw the same terror I felt reflected in his eyes. "We drilled too deep," he said simply. "We woke something up." By day 3 after the breakthrough, the storm had grown even stronger, becoming a swirling vortex directly above the drill site. Felix's meteorological equipment shorted out one by one as he tried to record the phenomenon. He practically lived in the meteorology lab now, sleeping on a cot next to his instruments, obsessively documenting what he called atmospheric impossibilities. The vortex had become a perfect spiral directly above the drill site, maintaining its position, despite winds that should have dispersed or moved it. "Look at this," Felix said, showing me the latest satellite imagery he'd managed to capture through the interference. He'd created a time-lapse of the storm's development, compressing 48 hours into 30 seconds of footage. The pattern was unmistakable. The storm wasn't just growing stronger, it was becoming more organized, more structured, like a living thing evolving before our eyes. The energy required to maintain this formation, it's incalculable, he explained, pointing to the thermal readings. And look at the temperature gradient. The thermal imaging showed concentric rings of alternating hot and cold, perfectly spaced in a pattern that couldn't possibly be natural. The storm wasn't just intense, it was structured, organized, as if designed by an intelligence. The winds reached 200 miles per hour, yet remained contained within a perfect 5-mile radius. It wasn't spreading, it was concentrating, focusing its power like a drill of its own. As we watched, a new development appeared in the footage. Tendrils of cloud extending downward from the central vortex, like fingers reaching for the facility. They moved with evident purpose, probing different sections of our complex before retreating. "When was this?" I asked, pointing to the tendrils. 2 hours ago, Felix said, his face grim. "They're getting closer each time, testing our defenses." Our communications with headquarters were deteriorating hourly. Static increasingly corrupted our video feeds, and our messages took longer to send and receive. It was as if something was deliberately isolating us. "We need to leave," I argued during our emergency meeting that afternoon. The team had gathered in the central conference room, fatigue and fear evident on every face. "Whatever this is, it's connected to what we found. We need to seal the shaft and evacuate until we understand what we're dealing with." "And throw away the most significant discovery in human history," Navar countered, slamming her fist on the table. Her eyes had that unnatural brightness I was beginning to dread. "This could revolutionize our understanding of life itself, organisms that predate Earth's formation. Think of the implications." The team was divided. Dessa and Felix sided with me. Something was very wrong and we needed to evacuate. Torin waffled, his engineer's curiosity at war with his instinct for self-preservation. Riker, our security chief, supported evacuation on principle. His job was to protect the team, and the situation clearly posed an unknown threat. The rest, increasingly influenced by Navar's fervour, voted to continue. Democracy in the face of extinction. Dr. Lucius Wren, our psychologist, suggested a compromise: continue research but prepare for emergency evacuation if conditions worsened. He'd been monitoring the team's mental state and reported increasing stress levels, poor sleep quality, and rising tension between colleagues. What he didn't mention, perhaps didn't know how to classify, were the shared nightmares, the whispers people heard in empty rooms, the shadows that moved when no one was casting them. That night, the dreams became collective. At breakfast, Dessa described drowning in a Black Sea, the exact same nightmare I'd been having. 3 others reported identical experiences. We were being invaded through our sleep, our minds probed and examined by something that had mastered the art of neural manipulation over eons of evolution. While we argued, the entity made its first move. It happened during the night shift. Riker and Azura were monitoring the drill core when the power fluctuated. The emergency lights kicked on, bathing the facility in blood-red illumination. Security footage showed them moving toward the shaft as if in a trance, their movements stiff and synchronous like puppets on strings. Their eyes reflected the camera flash with that same blue-green luminescence we'd observed in the samples. By the time the alarms triggered, the section had collapsed entirely. We never found their bodies. The official report listed them as crushed in a structural failure, but I know better. I reviewed the security footage frame by frame. In the last visible moment before the camera died, something reached up from the shaft. Something composed of the same luminous material, flowing like liquid yet maintaining structure like a pseudopod. It enveloped them and they walked into it willingly, their faces masks of rapture. The search lasted 18 hours. We found nothing but a trail of that glowing residue leading back to the drill shaft. The material evaporated when we tried to collect samples, leaving only a fine dust that analysis revealed to be altered human cellular matter, Riker and Azura's DNA, fundamentally restructured at the molecular level. That was when the sabotage began. Someone or something had corrupted our backup systems. Critical monitoring equipment failed at precisely the wrong moments. Laboratory samples were contaminated. Data mysteriously disappeared from our servers. At first, we suspected human error, fatigue, the stress of isolation. But the pattern was too precise, too targeted. It felt like we were being tested, our responses analysed, our weaknesses catalogued. The storm intensified after that, as if feeding on Riker and Azura's lives. It developed structure, tendrils of cloud that reached down toward our facility with deliberate purpose. They would probe different sections of our complex, retreating when met with resistance, testing for vulnerabilities. Equipment began to malfunction in patterns that couldn't be random. Systems would fail, then restart, cycling through in sequences that felt deliberate, almost like a language we couldn't quite decipher. The satellite uplink died completely, cutting us off from NASA headquarters. We were on our own. Our isolation became complete when the storm knocked out the ground-based communications array. Felix tried rigging an emergency beacon, but the signal couldn't penetrate the electromagnetic interference generated by the vortex. It was as if the storm had created a bubble around us, a perfect quarantine. Morale deteriorated rapidly. Arguments broke out over trivial matters. Paranoia spread like a virus. Some of the team became convinced that certain members were compromised, somehow allied with whatever we'd disturbed. Others began exhibiting strange behaviours, staring into space for hours, writing endless strings of symbols that matched nothing in any human language, sleepwalking towards the drill shaft, only to be intercepted by our dwindling security team. We lost 2 more people on the 5th day. Dr. Claudia Winters and tech specialist Damien Voss were found outside the facility perimeter, frozen solid in the Arctic cold. The thermal camera footage showed them disabling the security lockouts at 3:15 a.m. and walking straight into the storm. No protective gear, no rational explanation. Their bodies were wrong somehow, contorted into positions that human joints shouldn't allow, faces frozen in expressions of ecstatic revelation. And most disturbing of all, they were arranged in a precise geometric pattern that matched some of the symbols we'd been finding in the samples. Torin discovered these symbols first, intricate patterns etched into the rock samples, glowing with that same eerie light. Not carved or etched, they seemed to emerge from within the stone itself, becoming visible as if rising to the surface of a liquid. Geometric configurations that appeared both ancient and impossibly precise, arranged in spirals and fractals that hurt the eye to follow for too long. The revelation came when Dessa compared Torin's findings with Felix's atmospheric data. The same patterns were forming in the clouds above us, visible through our remaining cameras, perfect matching symmetry between sky and stone. "It's communicating," Dessa breathed, her voice filled with both terror and awe. "It's creating a connection between what's below and what's above." She was right. And it wasn't just communication, it was transformation. Air samples taken at increasing distances from the facility showed minute but significant changes in atmospheric composition. Oxygen levels were dropping. Trace gases appeared that our instruments couldn't identify. The temperature fluctuated wildly, as if the very atmosphere was being systematically tested, adjusted, refined. The creature, I can't think of it as anything else now, was establishing a conduit. I'm sure of it. The storm was its creation, a tool to reshape our atmosphere into something it could use, something it could breathe. It was terraforming our world, starting with the air directly above its prison. we discovered the bodies on day 7. 3 maintenance workers who had gone missing were found in a remote storage area, their corpses arranged in a precise geometric pattern that matched the symbols in the rocks. Their tissues had been transformed, partially crystallized, partially liquefied into that same luminous material. Their faces were frozen in expressions of ecstasy, as if their final moments had been blissful despite the horrific transformation of their bodies. The autopsies revealed something worse. Their brain tissue showed signs of profound reorganization. New neural pathways formed in patterns identical to the symbols. Whatever this entity was, it hadn't just killed them. It had used them, studied them, learned from their minds before discarding their altered remains. Navae became obsessed. She stopped sleeping entirely, spending hours staring at the samples, taking notes in a frantic shorthand none of us could decipher. When she did speak, her voice had changed, acquired a resonance that made my skin crawl. She began talking about the sacrifice necessary for transcendence and communion with the Ancient One. Her pupils had dilated to the point that her eyes appeared completely black, and occasionally when she thought no one was watching, I caught flickers of that blue-green luminescence behind her irises. She started holding meetings with select team members, those who had also begun showing signs of the influence. They would gather in the primary lab, doors locked, speaking in hushed tones. Several times I caught fragments of what sounded like chanting. The division among our team became stark, those who had fallen under the entity's sway and those still fighting its influence. We began to avoid each other, to treat colleagues we'd known for years as potential threats. The facility's corridors became hostile territory, where chance encounters might mean facing someone who was no longer entirely human. When I tried to destroy the samples, smashing the containment units with a fire axe in a moment of desperate clarity, she had Torin and 2 security officers lock me in my quarters. For my own protection, they said. Their eyes held that same unnatural gleam. I spent 18 hours trying to break out, listening to the changing sounds of the facility. The constant hum of the ventilation system took on a rhythmic quality, almost like breathing. The walls seemed to pulse slightly, as if the entire structure had become a living extension of whatever dwelled below. Through my window I could see the storm had developed distinct structure, a vast spiral with smaller vortices rotating within it, all moving in perfect synchronization. I broke the lock using a makeshift tool fashioned from my bed frame, emerging in time to witness the second attack. The storm's tendrils had penetrated our ventilation system, carrying that luminescent material through the air ducts like a living fog. It moved with purpose, seeking out victims. I watched in horror from a maintenance shaft as it surrounded 3 more team members in the mess hall. They didn't run. They didn't fight. They simply stood, arms outstretched in welcome as the glowing mist enveloped them. Their skin began to glow from within, their eyes transforming into pulsating orbs of that same blue-green light. Then, moving with the perfect coordination of a single organism, they simply walked out into the storm, disappearing into the swirling darkness. That night, those of us still unaffected barricaded ourselves in the communications center, 8 people out of an original 32. Dessa had the idea to search the scientific database for any historical records that might provide context for what we were experiencing. What we found chilled us to the core. There were ancient texts, obscure references in forgotten mythologies about beings from the void between galaxies that came to early Earth during its formation. Dormant gods waiting to reclaim what was once theirs. The Sumerians called them the Shapers from beyond the stars. Norse legends spoke of the sleepers beneath. Aboriginal Dreamtime stories warned of the first ones who waked below. Every culture had a different name, but the descriptions were eerily similar. Entities that controlled the skies, that could reshape matter, that hunted through dreams. Beings that had been deliberately imprisoned deep beneath the Earth's surface by some unknown force. The most disturbing account came from an obscure Antarctic expedition in 1923. The Journal of the Lone Survivor described finding a cave system beneath the ice where the walls were covered in symbols identical to those in our rock samples. The expedition had penetrated deep into the cave before experiencing phenomena matching what we were seeing now. Storms, mental influence, team members transformed. The journal ended with a desperate warning: they sleep beneath the world's foundations. To wake them is to invite the end of humanity as we know it. By drilling into that prison, we had given it a way out. We spent that night working feverishly to establish contact with the outside world. Felix jury-rigged a transmitter powerful enough to potentially penetrate the storm's interference. We recorded everything we'd learned, compressed the data, and began broadcasting on emergency frequencies. We had no way of knowing if anyone received our message. In the morning, we discovered that 2 more of our group had vanished during the night. Security footage showed them leaving their beds, eyes glowing, moving with that same puppet-like coordination towards the drill shaft. No one had heard them go. By the 10th day, the storm had wiped out 3 monitoring stations in the surrounding area. We lost contact with the backup team at Base Camp Theta, 30 miles to the south. When Torin managed to boost our radar system, we witnessed something horrifying. The storm had developed appendages, vast swirling arms of cloud and energy that reached out with deliberate purpose to destroy specific targets. Satellite imagery, before we lost contact completely, showed the vortex growing more structured, more organized. It wasn't random destruction. It was methodical, purposeful. The entity was learning, adapting to our world. The temperature outside had plummeted to -70. The storm's rotation had accelerated to speeds that should have been physically impossible to maintain. Spectroscopic analysis of the clouds showed increasing concentrations of those unknown compounds. The atmosphere within the vortex was being systematically altered, becoming less Earth-like by the hour. And still, our converted colleagues moved through the facility with purpose, gathering equipment, conducting experiments of their own. They no longer tried to hide their activities. They no longer needed to. They outnumbered us. Nevaeh had fully succumbed to its influence. We found her in the lab, having injected herself with a solution containing the luminous organisms. Her skin had begun to glow from within, veins tracing patterns identical to those in the rock samples. When she turned to face us, her features had begun to shift subtly, the proportions of her face slightly altered, as if something else was learning to wear her body. She spoke in a voice that wasn't entirely her own, layered, harmonic, beautiful in a way that made my soul recoil. "It showed me everything," she said, eyes wide and unseeing. "It's been here before, long before humans. Earth is just its incubator, and it's finally ready to hatch." She told us of the entity's history, how it had travelled between stars in meteorites, seeding countless worlds, hibernating for billions of years, while life evolved around its dormant form. How it had guided that evolution subtly through dreams and influence, preparing suitable hosts. How Earth had been one of its most successful incubations. "You think this is an invasion," she said, smiling with too many teeth. "It's a homecoming. We were always meant to be its children, its vessels, the final stage of human evolution." We locked her in the quarantine chamber, but by morning she was gone. The reinforced glass had melted from the inside out, leaving a perfectly circular hole. The security footage showed her body dissolving into that luminous liquid before flowing through ventilation ducts, reforming on the other side. She wasn't human anymore. None of the converted were. Our numbers dwindled to 4, myself, Dessa, Felix, and a security officer named Evo, who had barricaded himself in the armory early in the crisis. We made our final stand in the communications center, reinforcing the doors, taking shifts to maintain vigilance. We knew, it was only a matter of time. On day 13, we heard the sound of approaching helicopters. At first, we thought rescue had come, that our transmissions had gotten through, but Evo, ex-military, recognized the sound pattern. "Those are combat choppers," he warned. "Heavy payload." That's when Zeth arrived, a government operative in tactical gear who'd somehow made it through the storm in a specialized aircraft. He wasn't here to rescue us. His 6-person team secured the remaining facility with practiced efficiency, treating both the converted and unconverted with equal suspicion. They'd been monitoring our situation remotely through satellite imaging and the fragments of data we'd managed to transmit. He brought news that chilled my blood. Similar weather anomalies were forming at other points around the globe. The entity wasn't contained. It was spreading, using our facility as a beachhead. Seattle, Buenos Aires, and Osaka have reported identical atmospheric disturbances, he informed us during debriefing. Microscale for now, but growing. And we've detected seismic anomalies at those locations consistent with what preceded your situation here. The implications were clear. The entity wasn't just escaping, it was coordinating a global emergence. Our drilling had awakened the primary node, but there were others, dormant until now, responding to some signal we couldn't detect. "We're going nuclear," he informed the remaining team members, his face grim. "Orders from the top, this site will be vaporized in 18 hours. We need to collect what data we can and evacuate." The converted somehow knew about the plan immediately. They began abandoning the facility en masse, walking out into the storm that parted to receive them. Within hours, they had vanished into the vortex, Navae among them, leading the procession like a priestess, their purpose unknown, their destination a mystery. I knew that a nuclear strike wouldn't be enough. Whatever this thing was, it existed in dimensions beyond our understanding. Conventional weapons would just free it completely. The nuclear option might destroy the physical evidence, but it wouldn't address what was happening elsewhere globally. And based on what we'd learned from the ancient texts, radiation might even accelerate the entity's evolution, giving it access to new forms of energy. I had another plan. The drill shaft was its conduit, its umbilical cord connecting ancient prison to new kingdom. If we could collapse it completely, seal the entity back in its prison, we might buy humanity time. The explosives in our mining equipment might be enough, if placed at the right depth. "You want to do what?" Zeth stared at me like I'd lost my mind. Perhaps I had. "The entity is using the shaft as a direct conduit," I explained, spreading out the facility schematics. "Look at the atmospheric data. The vortex is perfectly aligned with the drill hole. It's maintaining a connection. If we sever that connection..." "You're suggesting going back down there? After what happened to your team?" He shook his head. "Suicide mission. Better than nuclear winter," I countered. "And we don't know that a nuclear strike would even work against something this alien. The ancient texts suggest it survived extinction-level events before." Dessa backed me up, presenting the biological data we'd gathered. "This organism operates on quantum principles we barely understand. It exists partly outside our dimension. A physical barrier, miles of collapsed rock, might contain it better than anything else we could try." After hours of debate, Zeth reluctantly agreed. His team would extract all the data and surviving personnel, while I would lead a small group to place the charges. His superiors weren't happy, but they granted a 12-hour window before the nuclear option was implemented. Dessa and Felix helped me prepare while Zeth coordinated with his people. The plan was simple but suicidal. I would descend into the shaft with the charges, place them where the cavity began, and detonate from below. The others would try to escape in Zeth's aircraft before the blast wave hit. I spent my last hours reviewing everything we knew about the entity, searching for weaknesses, patterns, anything that might help me resist its influence during the descent. Dessa supplied me with a cocktail of drugs designed to keep my mind sharp and potentially resist the entity's mental intrusions. Untested, experimental, but our best hope. "If you feel it taking over," she warned, handing me a loaded syringe. "Use this, it's a neurotoxin. Quick, painless." Her eyes told me she understood the implication. Better dead than converted. The storm had reached unprecedented intensity as I prepared for the descent. Wind speeds topped 300 miles per hour, yet maintained that unnatural precision, destroying only what the entity wanted destroyed. The sky had taken on that sickly luminescence, pulsating in patterns that matched what we'd seen in the rock samples. The air itself felt wrong somehow, thicker, as if the very atmosphere was being restructured molecule by molecule. We lost Felix just before the mission began. He'd gone to retrieve crucial meteorological data from his lab and never returned. We found only splashes of that luminous fluid where he should have been, and new equations written on his whiteboard, in a hand that wasn't quite his, calculations for atmospheric conversion on a planetary scale. The converted were no longer even pretending to be human. They moved through the facility's shadows, their forms fluid, merging and separating as needed. They seemed to be avoiding direct confrontation, perhaps conserving their energy for the final phase of whatever transformation they were undergoing. I began the descent at precisely 3 a.m., using a modified maintenance elevator that ran alongside the drill shaft. The initial journey was swift. The upper portions of the shaft remained structurally intact, but as I passed the 5-mile mark, the changes became apparent. The smooth machine-board walls had become organic, pulsating with veins of that luminous material. The elevator stopped automatically at the 7-mile depth, where the shaft had become too altered to safely navigate mechanically. From there, I would need to climb down manually, using the emergency ladder systems built into the shaft wall. As I stepped from the elevator platform onto the first rung, I felt the metal shift beneath my weight, not bending, flowing, adapting like living tissue. The entire shaft was being remade, converted into an extension of the entity below. The descent was a journey into madness. The drill core had been transformed, its walls pulsing with veins of that luminous material. What had been smooth, excavated rock was now organic, almost intestinal, a living tunnel that breathed and pulsed around me. In places, the walls had developed structures like eyes or sensory organs, tracking my movement as I passed. Occasionally, tendrils of light would reach out toward me, recoiling when they touched the specialized suit Zeth's team had provided, a modified hazmat design with built-in electrical field generators that seemed to repel the luminous substance. The deeper I went, the stronger the pull on my mind became. Whispers, promises, visions of power beyond imagining if I would just submit, just accept its gift. I fought it with everything I had, reciting complex geological formulas, focusing on the technical aspects of placing the charges. Dessa's drugs helped, keeping me anchored in reality as the entity probed my consciousness, looking for weaknesses. But each mile down, its influence grew stronger. I began to see things in the peripheral of my vision, shapes that disappeared when I turned to look, flickers of movement that shouldn't be possible. In the narrow shaft, by the 8th mile, the shaft had widened considerably, the walls now draped with hanging curtains of that living, luminous material. They undulated like sea anemones, reaching toward me hungrily. The air was thick with microscopic particles that my suit's filters struggled to block. Spores or seeds of whatever the entity was, ready to spread, to infect, to convert. The comm system had failed completely by then. I was alone, cut off from the surface, my only company, the whispers that grew louder with each passing minute. They were no longer merely sounds, they had become voices I recognized. My deceased parents, former lovers, childhood friends, all speaking to me with increasing clarity promising reunion, completion, transcendence. The entity was mining my memories, using them as weapons against my resolve. 9 miles down I saw it. The cavity had grown, becoming a vast cathedral of glowing stone. The original breakthrough, barely large enough to fit our probes, had expanded into a space that shouldn't have been physically possible, as if the entity had folded space itself to create its sanctum. The walls pulsed with intricate, moving patterns, those same symbols we'd found in the rock samples, now alive and flowing like liquid light across surfaces that defied Euclidean geometry. And suspended in its center was something that defied description. Not quite solid, not quite energy. A presence that shifted between states of matter, that folded in on itself in ways that hurt to look at directly. It had no fixed form, no boundaries I could comprehend. Parts of it seemed to extend into dimensions I couldn't perceive, vanishing and reappearing as if phasing between realities. Surrounding it were the missing team members, or what remained of them, their bodies transformed into conduits, veins glowing as they fed their life force into the entity. Nevaeh floated nearest to the central mass, her body almost entirely converted to that luminous material, her features still recognizable but altered, elongated, refined, her eyes now vast pools of light that contained galaxies of complexity. Riker, Azura, Felix, and a dozen others hovered in a precise geometric formation around her, their bodies in various stages of transformation, connected to each other and to the central entity by tendrils of living light. They were no longer individual beings. They had become nodes in a vast nervous system with the entity as its central brain. And that brain was aware of me. In that moment, it noticed me. It turned what might have been attention in my direction, and my mind was flooded with visions. Worlds consumed, civilizations transformed, a cosmic cycle of feeding that had played out countless times across the universe. I understood then what we'd encountered, a parasite that traveled between stars, hibernating for eons inside planets until awakened. It consumed worlds from within, converting their atmospheres to extend its reach to new planets. Earth was just its latest meal. I saw its history unfold before me, how it had arrived on primordial Earth billions of years ago, embedded in a meteorite, how it had slept through the ages while life evolved around it, occasionally influencing that evolution through subtle psychic emanations. I saw how another intelligence, something ancient and powerful, perhaps from another world, had recognized the threat and imprisoned it deep beneath the Earth's crust, placing seals and barriers that had held until our drill broke through. I saw other worlds it had consumed, billions of lives absorbed and transformed into extensions of its consciousness. It didn't consider this evil. It was simply fulfilling its purpose, expanding, growing, becoming more complex with each world it assimilated. It was offering this same gift to humanity, transcendence through absorption. The entity communicated directly to my mind, bypassing language entirely. It showed me what it planned for Earth, a complete atmospheric conversion that would make our planet habitable for its kind while transforming surviving humans into something new. Not death, it insisted, but evolution. The weak would perish, but the strong would become vessels, nodes in its expanding consciousness, immortal in a way humans could barely comprehend. And then it showed me myself, transformed, elevated, my consciousness expanded beyond my physical form, free to experience realities beyond human perception. The temptation was immense. Knowledge, power, immortality, everything humanity had ever sought, offered freely. All I had to do was accept. All I had to do was join them. Elian. Nevaeh's voice, but not Nevaeh's voice, layered with countless others, harmonizing in impossible ways. Her transformed body drifted toward me, trailing tendrils of light that reached for me like fingers. "We've been waiting for you. You belong with us. You've always known this was coming." She wasn't wrong. Since childhood, I'd had dreams of vast spaces beneath the earth, of entities that waited in darkness, patient and eternal. I'd been drawn to geology, to caves, to the study of Earth's hidden places, by something I never fully understood. Had the entity been calling me all along? Had my entire life been shaped by its subtle influence, guiding me towards this moment? "Join us," said Felix, his voice equally transformed. "The resistance is unnecessary, painful. You've seen what we become. You've felt the truth of it." Around me, the others moved closer. My colleagues, my friends, now avatars of something ancient and vast. Their bodies rippled with that internal light, their features fluid, shifting between human and something else. Something beautiful and terrible in equal measure. I fought through the mental assault, placing the charges even as Navai's transformed body approached me. She wasn't alone. The converted team members moved toward me with perfect coordination. Their bodies changed in subtle ways that became more apparent as they drew closer. Elongated limbs, too flexible joints, skin that rippled with that internal luminescence. Their movements were jerky, puppet-like, their voices a chorus of countless others as they begged me to listen, to understand the gift being offered. "We can evolve," the thing wearing my colleague's face whispered, Navai's voice layered with others. Ancient, alien voices that resonated in my bones, become part of something eternal. "We have seen the truth, Elian. Join us, become more than human." Her hand, no longer quite a hand, reached for me, fingers elongating into tendrils of that same luminous material. I backed away, nearly dropping the detonator. The last charge set, I looked into her glowing eyes. "We already are part of something eternal," I told her, "our humanity. And I won't let you take that from us." I hit the detonator. The explosion tore through the shaft like a solar flare, collapsing millions of tons of rock into the cavity. The converted screamed in unison as their connection to the entity was suddenly severed, a psychic backlash that reverberated through the facility above. I was thrown upward by the blast wave, my environment suit shredded, bones breaking as I slammed against the narrow walls. The heat was overwhelming, the pressure crushing. I should have died instantly. By some miracle, or perhaps the entity's last act of cruelty, I survived long enough to reach the surface levels. The shaft itself had become a volcanic chimney, superheated gases and debris shooting upward with explosive force. Emergency protocols had sealed the upper sections, but the entire facility was coming apart at the seams, support structures buckling as the permafrost beneath liquefied from the heat. Through a haze of pain and blood loss, I crawled through maintenance tunnels, following emergency lighting that flickered and died as the power systems failed catastrophically. Above, the storm was consuming itself, the perfect vortex collapsing as its sustaining force was cut off. Lightning of impossible colours, electric blue, sickly green, deep violet, arced through the clouds as atmospheric energy discharged all at once. The converted who hadn't been near the shaft when it collapsed were moving erratically. Now, their coordination gone, reduced to shambling, aggressive husks driven by fragmentary impulses from a severed hive mind. I narrowly avoided two of them in the darkened corridors. Former technicians whose bodies were partially transformed, glowing fluids leaking from orifices that shouldn't exist, their movements jerky and unpredictable as they searched for a connection that was no longer there. Dessa found me in a secondary access corridor, half conscious and bleeding internally. Her face was streaked with soot and blood. Not all of it hers. The biologist had fought her way through converted team members to reach the evacuation point, armed with nothing but a fire axe and desperate courage. "Felix is dead," she gasped, helping me to my feet. "They tore him apart when the connection broke, like rabid animals." Together with Evo, a security officer I barely knew, they dragged me to the waiting aircraft as the facility crumbled around us. Bulkheads buckled, floors collapsed. The converted that hadn't been near the shaft when it collapsed were moving erratically now, their coordination gone, reduced to shambling, aggressive husks driven by fragmentary impulses from a severed hive mind. We reached the landing pad just as a section of the main research complex imploded, swallowed by a sinkhole that opened beneath it. The storms had weakened the permafrost, and now the Earth itself was reclaiming what we had built. Zeth was already in the pilot's seat, rotors spinning, the craft hovering inches above the pad as we scrambled aboard. "That's it! We're the last ones!" Dessa shouted over the roar of the engines. "Everyone else is either dead or changed." Through the aircraft's windows, I had one final glimpse of what remained of our facility. The storm above had begun to dissipate, the perfect vortex unraveling like a thread pulled from a sweater. But on the ground, dozens of transformed humans stood in concentric circles around what had been the drill shaft, their bodies glowing with that internal light, their faces turned upward as if in prayer or supplication. At the centre, where the main shaft had been, a new formation was taking shape, a crystalline structure emerging from the earth, pulsating with that same blue-green luminescence. We were airborne when the explosion came, not from below, but from above. A missile strike launched from a stealth aircraft we never saw, the nuclear option, implemented despite our efforts. The flash was blinding, the shockwave nearly bringing down our helicopter, but we were outside the radius of total destruction, protected by distance and the ridgeline we'd just passed. The last thing I saw as Zeth's aircraft lifted off was the central research module collapsing into a sinkhole that had opened beneath it, a final convulsion of the earth as pressure equalized below. We were the only survivors as Zeth piloted us through the collapsing storm, the vortex shrinking as its connection to its creator was severed. Through the aircraft's windows, I watched the perfect spiral dissipate, replaced by natural weather patterns, dark clouds heavy with ordinary rain, lightning that flashed normal white-yellow. It looked almost disappointingly mundane in its aftermath. Just a storm, just the sky, as if the entity had never been. That was 3 days ago. We're in a military hospital now, location classified, somewhere in the continental United States. Men in suits debrief us daily, constructing the cover-up that will hide the truth from the world. A catastrophic equipment failure, a tragic accident, unexpected geological activity causing structural collapse. Nothing more. Our blood is tested hourly for signs of contamination. Our brain activity is monitored during sleep. The questions are endless, precise, designed to detect inconsistencies that might indicate lingering influence. So far we've been declared clean, but I wonder how they can be sure. How can anyone be sure of something so alien, so beyond our understanding? The other global anomalies reportedly subsided within hours of our action in Alaska. The emergent patterns in Seattle, Buenos Aires, and Osaka dissipated before reaching critical mass. For now at least, the entity's coordinated emergence has been halted. The official position is that we've contained the threat completely, but I know better. The painkillers can't keep away the dreams that still come. Visions of the entity, weakened but not destroyed, slowly rebuilding its strength in its ancient prison. I feel its rage, its hunger. And worse, I see through its eyes sometimes, glimpsing other outposts around the world, other drilling projects approaching depths they shouldn't. I hear its voice in the white noise of hospital equipment, in the static between radio stations, in the hum of fluorescent lights, waiting, patient, eternal. "We've reviewed your statement, Dr. Kovic," says the latest government representative, younger than the others, sharper, with eyes that miss nothing. "The official report will indicate a methane pocket breach causing catastrophic facility failure. the weather anomaly will be classified as an unprecedented but natural Arctic storm system. And the other sites, I ask? The ones where similar patterns were emerging? He smiles thinly. Coincidence, satellite malfunction, nothing to concern the public. I want to grab him, shake him, make him understand what we've barely escaped. But my broken body won't cooperate, and my credibility is paperclip thin. To them, I'm a traumatized survivor, my perceptions compromised by extreme stress and injury. Perhaps they're right. Perhaps it's easier to believe that. They've relocated the surviving families of our team, given them new identities, generous compensation packages. The NASA Deep Drilling Initiative has been quietly shelved. Official records altered to minimize the scope and ambition of Project Prometheus. I overheard 2 agents discussing similar projects in Russia and China. Diplomatic backchannels being used to discourage further exploration without revealing why. But human curiosity is relentless. Someone else will drill. Someone else will reach down into the darkness where ancient things sleep. It's inevitable. Late at night when the hospital is quiet, I sometimes feel a strange sensation. A vibration that isn't quite physical, a pressure that isn't quite mental. It's as if something is reaching for me across vast distances, searching for the connection we briefly shared. In those moments, I understand that what we found wasn't just an entity or an organism. It was an intelligence so vast, so ancient, that our minds cannot truly comprehend it. We are ants trying to understand a hurricane. What scares me most isn't that it might return. What scares me is the suspicion that it never truly left. That parts of it have always been here, sleeping in the collective unconscious of humanity, guiding our evolution, our development, our technological progress, leading us, step by carefully calculated step, towards the moment when we would drill deep enough, reach far enough, to free it from its prison. Perhaps we were always meant to be its liberators. Perhaps humanity itself is the entity's longest, most patient experiment. I've started collecting news reports, seemingly unrelated incidents that make a disturbing pattern when viewed together. Unusual weather formations that last just hours before dissipating. Strange lights reported in remote areas. People going missing only to reappear days later, changed in subtle ways their loved ones can't quite articulate. Scientists and engineers working on deep earth projects who suddenly abandon their careers to pursue fringe interests. It's happening slowly, carefully below the threshold of wider attention. The storm has subsided for now, but the barometric readings globally show subtle changes, shifts in atmospheric composition too small for most to notice, but unmistakable to those who know what to look for. The entity may be contained, but its influence continues to spread like a cancer, molecule by molecule. The seeds have been planted, the spores released. It only needs time. I've told you this story as a warning. If you see unusual weather patterns, perfect spirals, unnatural colours, storms that move with purpose, run. If you notice people changing, becoming obsessive, speaking of communion or transcendence, their eyes catching the light in unusual ways, don't trust them. And if you're near any deep drilling operation, any project that seeks to penetrate the Earth's ancient crust, get as far away as you can. Because we didn't discover something down there in Alaska. We woke it up, and now it knows we're here.